Hi, there's lots of people starting to join. Welcome to this afternoon's webinar. We're just going to make a start, so get yourselves comfortable. Hopefully you've got all got a nice mug of tea and you're ready for this joint webinar that we're delivering this afternoon in partnership with National Star College. So we're just waiting for more and more people to come in. We love to see your faces, actually, and I see some familiar faces. Hi, Debbie. I've met you before, haven't I? Hi.
Yes,
It's nice to see your familiar faces, actually, and I know those of you that attended our mental wealth summit a couple of weeks ago. It was really nice to see the audience participation, because sometimes as deliverers, we're just delivering to blank screens, and I know that we're all probably crawling through the last couple of days to get us to the Easter break. Hopefully all of you have got, at least got some good period of time off during the holiday period, because I know that if for those of you that are, whether you're working in education or traineeships or apprenticeship learners, it's been a tough term. So hopefully we're going to provide you some support this afternoon and give you an opportunity to hear about some of the things that we're developing as part of the SENCo Centre for Excellence. We do like you to keep your cameras on. We are asking you if you're happy to. We are using the chat and the question and answer buttons that obviously everybody's really familiar with now, because we've all been using this platform for over a year. When I start to present, I won't be able to see the chat, so you might have to interrupt me. I won't be able to see, but we do ask that you please keep your that would be really useful just because there's so many people coming through. We had about 123 at last count at lunchtime that have registered, so obviously there'll be quite a lot of background noise. Hi Bernadette, nice to see you. I was just saying it's really nice to see some familiar faces that have joined us this afternoon. So I think probably we've got another minute to go. I don't know if anybody wants to put in the chat just while we've got a couple of minutes, any questions that they were hoping that we might be answering this afternoon, so that we can try and bring that into the session. Just use the chat, and as Caroline's saying, if you can mute your microphones when you're not asking a question, that would be brilliant.
Can I just say that we need to give a warning that we are recording this webinar. So if you're not happy to be seen on the webinar, please keep your camera off. As Sam says, please make sure that your microphone is muted when you're not presenting or talking, asking a question.
Okay, we've got 1 minute to go. We want to make a prompt start. We've got quite a lot of information to give you today. We've got loads and loads of slides. Partly we've done that so that it's information that you can take back to your organisations. We definitely don't want to be giving death by PowerPoint, but we also recognise that we don't want you to all have to take lots and lots of notes, that you can just use our presentations and take them straight back to your own organisations to, we're all about sharing the practice and not recreating the wheel. So, hopefully this will give you a chance to relax and just listen. But we might not go through all the slides, and we might speed through a couple, just so that you've got them afterwards. And like I said, we are recording it because there's been lots of interest in people that haven't been able to attend, and we want to get this information to a widest field across the sector. So I can see that the clock has turned 4. And so I'm just going to start to share my slides. So I won't be able to see the chat for a minute. So like I said, feel free to interrupt if you've got any questions, but I'm just going to start off the session by talking about that many of you will have already heard information about our specialist support model here at Weston College that I know many of you are introducing or have been using for quite a long time within your colleges. So today we're really thinking about how to raise the profile and the status of SEN specialists. Many of you that I've met before, face to face and virtually. I'm Sam Mayhew, I'm the Dean of Faculty here at Weston College, and I'm also the strategic lead for the SEND Centre of Excellence. And our focus is around people. And as you know, you'll have met my colleagues, Elaine and Sarah, at Derby College and Norwich College, who are really focusing on the community and the curriculum. So if you do want any additional support around the curriculum and around working with employers, then please contact those or just email us and we can put you in touch with them. So I'm really delighted this afternoon that I'm also joined by Davina Jones from the National Star College, who is the National Lead for Policy and Research. And we've also got Barney Inglis, and he's a consultant in special educational and needs and disabilities and works closely with the National Star College. So we're going to be talking to you from an FE perspective, a general FE college, around a model that we use, and then we're going to move into looking at I'll move on the slide, actually, that could help. So yeah, we'll look at the FE kind of role of a specialist practitioner, but also look at how we can support our managers and our aspiring managers that are working within the learning support roles and within that SENCo roles as they want to progress in their career. And hopefully we'll give you some information to take back to your colleges. And we know at the moment that everybody's got their heads down in strategic planning. So we thought that this would be a great opportunity to kind of show what can be achieved efficiently through a model of support. So I'll just start off now by kind of giving the current position. And some of you may have heard this from the college before, so apologies for that, but we have got lots of new people joining us today. As you are all aware, there's a wide range of CPD opportunities for support workers up to level 3. There's the level 2 and the level 3 apprenticeship in supporting teaching and learning. And we know that that framework does include FE now, and it did change those standards back in September 2020. To think about that for a minute. And there are lots and lots of opportunities for support workers to undertake courses, but the only real progression is into teaching roles and into doing the PGCE and becoming that teacher. And it's really important that we found within our organisation that there is a support role, a teaching role, but there's also a specialist role that works in between as that cultural interpreter that works alongside learners with SEND, learning difficulties and disabilities, to help the curriculum staff to differentiate their programme of study and making sure it's that real inclusive classroom. There is a recognised framework at level 4. And what we've seen is that staff are really keen to professionalise and specialise in SEND and learning disabilities. But then once they've done that, there seems to be very limited opportunities to progress within the organisations. Previously, you'll be seeing in the school sector that there was that higher level teaching assistant qualification, but it did lack the focus on really understanding. It was more the teaching, the support for the teacher, rather than looking at the support or the specialist role of working with learners with SEND. And then we have the SENCo training, but that's really focused on school. And I think as an FE sector, what we're saying is that there needs to be parity, and there needs to be a role that's nationally recognised, that all employers can or FE providers can employ these specialist practitioners. So as the Centre for Excellence, we've been commissioned to look at a scoping project in the next three to 4 months to really scope this out and see who wants to be part of this initiative to develop this specialist role. I've talked a little bit about the specialist model being around that cultural interpreter, and it creates that motivational career structure so that people have the opportunity to progress from a support worker to a specialist support and then into an advanced practitioner and a manager. Or some people then decide to take a different route and want to go into the teaching role and working maybe within foundation learning or within level 1 programs. So I think that this is our model of practice here. It's very much around the personal tutor, the specialist practitioner, working together to individualise that programme of study. And what we saw through that high level investment of staff training and the motivational career structure, where a specialist is on the same lecturing scale as a lecturer, so that we're recognising that if you're a chemistry teacher, you have a chemistry degree and then you have your teaching qualification. If you're working with learners with SEND, then you have your SEND degree, and you also have your teaching qualification as you go on. And through that, we've ensured that those student achievement rates are increased, and that we have really high levels of learners that progress on to successful destinations. And through this model that we started back in 2006, we developed a wide range of specialisms, which meant that we were able to open the doors to more learners with more complex needs. And the impact of that showed that the money we were spending on out-of-county placements was actually reinvesting in our local area. And I think that you'll be able to see this from this slide, is that, you know, back in 2007 and 8, over £3 million was being spent out of county, and there is a need for those specialist placements for some learners. But when you looked at the types of learners, we were looking at high functioning students with autism that needs could be met within a local general FE environment. So we then were able to, as you can see, we went from 112 learners with SEND or complex needs right up to where we are now of 510. Actually, it's 516 now. And it meant that we really built that partnership with our local authority to reinvest in the training and the funding within our local area, and the learners were more successful because we could easily transition, more seamlessly transition them into HE and employment. So I just went over this slide 2 seconds ago, and I know that I'm speaking at speed today because I'm recognising we've got quite a lot to get through. So I'll just go through, but it's making sure that having an apprenticeship model within our organisation, so having the Institute for Apprenticeships recognising that there's a need for a specialist practitioner, it means that we've got that transition from level 2 to level 5 in training, and that we're utilising our levy to support staff, and we're able to grow our own, and we're able to be proactive in that succession planning approach for the future. So we're proposing that there is a higher level apprenticeship in a SEND practitioner or a specialist practitioner. The name hasn't been decided, but that will be something that we want to work with you to see what you feel that should be. So at the moment, you can see that there's 2 practitioner roles. You've got the assistant practitioner in health, and you've also got the early years practitioner. And it's a massive process that we need to go through to get to the standards, or the apprenticeship standard at the end, where you have that approved delivery. So what we're saying today is we need to create 10 employers across the sector who would be part of a trailblazer group that would help to submit that occupational proposal, which would look at what the role of a specialist practitioner is within a college, and be part of that group. And we're looking for, we only need 10 employers. And we've already got about 6 FE colleges and specialist colleges that have said, yes, we want to be part of this. We think that this is the way forward, and we believe that the schools should have this type of role in their education, in their support structures as well. So if you think it's something that your college would be willing to be part of, either as a trailblazer or as a stakeholder, that would be fabulous if you could just email us with an expression of interest to be part of a focus group that will start to look at that, making the submission for that occupational proposal. Once we have that group, we'll start to build a relationship with the manager from the Institute of Apprenticeships, will become our relationship manager, and we'll start to work through that process. And to argue that there's a real need for this occupation within the school and the FE sector, so that we can then start to build it in, so that hopefully in September 2022 we can be looking at a higher level apprenticeship to train staff, when we're all working towards the same standards of training for our staff, so we have that specialist role within our organisations. So like I said here, it's creating that job role at the moment. We need the trailblazer. We then need to look at the occupational proposal, and we need to all focus on what we're going to expect that specialist practitioner to look like. What are going to be the skills, the knowledges and the behaviours, and then we can map the different pathways across, whether that's a foundation degree embedded within it, or if we're just going to focus on the standards at the end, and then students or or staff can access the different types of training as they go through, but they will come out with a higher level apprenticeship, and then that could lead them into that SENCo training or other level 7 programs, 6 and 7 programs. So I've kind of talked about this already, so I'm just going to stop sharing for a minute so that I can look at your faces rather than my screen. So am I frozen? Am I there? Okay, so I can see that Sarah Lee Good's here with us this afternoon, who I mentioned earlier from Derby College. So she's asked the question around she's saying she would like to be one of those trailblazer groups. So thank you, Sarah. I think it's really important. I think that many of you have already got these professions within your organisation. And I think that it's just making sure that we're professionalising and ensuring that we have staff that are really highly trained at working with learners with SEND. Sarah, I can see that you've got your hand up. You just raised your hand. Was there something that you wanted to add?
I think the other thing that we're investigating exactly along this theme is the creation of a job coaching apprenticeship, where you've actually got elements of training and systematic instruction as well as job coaching as the core of that. And I think as we move as a sector towards far more work-based training for this complex cohort, that really would be invaluable. So I'd really like to extend or be able to have that conversation with you as well, because it should form part of this, the kind of the development work that you're already doing.
Yeah, and I think that there's either an opportunity to embed that within a specialist practitioner role or to create something different. And I think from initial talking with some of the staff within our college who have already created higher level apprenticeships, it's about finding something that has that progression opportunity. And at the moment, that level 2, level 3 teaching and learning apprenticeship just isn't fit for purpose, if I'm being totally frank and honest. In my organisation and the staff that I'm employing, that 20% job training that you're doing outside of the apprenticeship is so crucial in ensuring that they're able to support within an FE environment. And it's just making sure that there's parity between the FE and the school sector, because if we've got that parity, surely the transition between organisations will be more seamless, and we will be recognised as sharing best practice and sharing support and having that consistent model. So I gave you a little bit of a whistle-stop tour. I recognise I've been talking really, really fast. Has there anybody else that's got any specific questions around that before I hand over to my colleagues, Davina and Barney? So as another somebody else has just said, so thank you. If you are interested, we are going to put the group together straight after the Easter break, when we're feeling refreshed and we come back with a bit more of a spring in our step. I think just from the Centre for Excellence at Weston College and the same with Derby, we're really excited about the next phase, which we will be launching in April. But what we want to hear from you about what you want across the set. What do you want us to be part of the third stage of the Centre for Excellence? How can we support you? How can we share best practice? What can we set up? We've had webinars, focus groups, one-to-one discussions, visits, virtual visits, conferences. But what else do you feel that would really benefit your organisations? And I know that we're all hoping that in the next year we can start to have some actual face-to-face meetings rather than everything being virtually. But I think it's really important that we hear from you, because we've got a blank sheet ahead of us over the next year, and we want to put the things on the platform that you guys want and you feel is really supportive to your organisations. So I know that on the end slide will be all our details. You've all got them anyway, but just send us we're not asking for essays or War and Peace. We're just asking for a bullet point. What do you think would be good for you in your organisation? So it will help Sarah and I to kind of shape the future of our Centres for Excellence. So without further ado, I will hand over to Davina, who's going to talk to you about SEND managers programme, and I'll leave it to you, Davina.
Thank you, Sam. Just to pick up on something Sarah said. Hi, Sarah. I know that BASE did a lot of work on national occupational standards for job coaches, and I'm sure Hugh would be more than happy to share that. We did some work with them, so that might be quite a good starting point for the job coaches. I'm just going to share some more slides with you, everybody. Keep your fingers crossed that it works. Okay, can everyone see slides? Great. Okay, so we've been really lucky since 2018. We've been delivering the SEND Essential Managers course, and I've seen quite a few names come into this session who I recognise. So it's been sort of great fun and a great privilege to work with many of you across the FE sector. And I thought I was chatting with Sam, and now seems like quite a good time to reflect on everything that we've learned from that programme and think about what the future looks like for managers in SEND, be that mainstream, specialists, training providers, you know, wherever those roles are based, the challenges are all similar. We were looking back over the cohorts that we've worked with, and a lot of the common themes, a lot of the challenges people faced were to do with linking student outcomes to curriculum development. So funding, could people access funding, make the most of funding, and a lot of this was about working in partnership with the local authority. So that was quite a significant thing for many providers, was how to develop and maintain those partnerships in their local areas. There was also external specialists, how to use external specialists to support learners' journey, and understanding the actual duties of a college as an organisation. What we've done over the period of that programme is we've really looked at how we can use the SENCo of practice as guidance and as an audit tool for organisations to be able to reflect upon where they are in their journey and to plan areas that they would like to improve. What it's also highlighted is the responsibility of managers in SEND and the specialist natures of the roles that they hold, and how their role engages with so many people across the organisation, and how it has to bring relationships across the organisation and from outside of the organisation together to broker a learning journey for a SEND learner. So it's really key to think about all of those things when we're thinking about what that specialist SEND practitioner role would look like going forward. So we started, I've started this part of the presentation. Bunny is going to go on and talk in a little bit more detail later on. So I've really started from the SENCo of practice. And obviously, you are all more than aware that we have our duties in the SENCo of practice that we have to comply with. When you start looking at the SENCo of practice and looking at the actual content for FE providers, it is very thin, which in one way is to our advantage, and in another way isn't that much an advantage when you're looking for occupational standards and structures to support people to develop roles with them. So I've looked at the kind of very specific FE guidance, and really you've got your duties, and you've got a selection of chapter headings, which I've broken down into 3 areas. One is working with partners, be that across education, health, social care, local authorities. The other is the actual study programme and support for SEND learners. And the third one is around preparing young people for adulthood and our responsibility as the last education provider that young people engage with. And it's our duty to prepare people for that adult curriculum as opposed to a school curriculum, and to prepare them for life after college. So we looked at working with partners, and this is something that we've spent a lot of time on the Essential Managers programme, that we spent a lot of time working with various organisations, with individuals from organisations, with teams from organisations, because there is massive inconsistency from local authorities in the way that they deliver the local offer, the way they engage with colleges, the way they manage relationships between schools and colleges, so that there is naturally inconsistency across the FE sector depending upon which local authority you're engaging with. Some local authorities are fantastic, some are average, some are poor, but that is the way of the world. We don't have control over that, but what we potentially can shape and control is the best practice of a college working with a local authority. I think what was quite interesting is when we looked at and worked with FE colleges who had a very good relationship with their local authority, it was the relationship between the leadership team at the FE college and the local authority, which made it easier for specialist practitioners to engage, plan and support curriculum projects activities, which really made a strong local offer. So that in itself was quite interesting, that where a college's leadership team was highly engaged, it made the job of the people who worked there a lot easier as well. It was interesting as well in terms of with local authorities. Some local authorities were very keen on reviewing outcomes for SEND learners. Some local authorities were placing SEND learners and not that engaged in the outcomes. So I think part of the idea of the specialist practitioner role and promoting the role of a SEND manager in FE is about aspiration for those really good outcomes for learners. And if you've got a role who is championing those outcomes for learners to the organisation's leadership team and externally, that is an enormously positive thing. The other thing as well, working with local authorities that has become clear through the SEND Managers programme, and again is something to think about in developing this role, is the range of SEND that people are working with. So SEND support right through to young people, very complex needs, and how to ensure the identification of SEND and the correct support being put in place for all learners within your organisations, as opposed to just those with particularly complex needs or those whose needs are flagged during transition. So that was something that a lot of people found challenging within organisations. I'm sorry that the text is very small on this slide. I was trying to get everything on one slide, but it looks quite small on my screen now. We looked very much, this was around study programmes and support for SEND as part of the learner's journey. So this is the area in which most colleges and most people are really, really comfortable, because this is the actual area where you're doing the doing with learners. So this was often in terms of the SEND Managers programme, just required facilitation from Barney and I, because all of you were doing amazing things, fantastic jobs, had so many ideas, so many things to share. And I think this is what Sam's talking about in terms of that community practice. The more people ask questions and put in and challenge and have a new idea and share and bring it together, the better everything becomes. Because certainly, you know, some of our sessions, people were so open and sharing of what had worked really well and what had been a challenge, that by the end of it, we'd all learnt an enormous amount, because we'd all learnt from each other. One thing that we've looked at in terms of at National Star was when we looked at the learner journey through the organisation. So from like pre-admission through to transitioning, through to baseline, through to being on programme, and through to the actual exit and transition on from college. One thing we looked at is we tried to look at it from a student's point of view. What are the benefits to the students? And those are the ones everyone can name really easily and talk about really easily. But then we thought about, well, how do the staff benefit? How can we articulate how staff experience this journey as well? And what makes it a good experience for staff? And how can you manage and motivate staff to get the best from them? And then what's the impact from the organisation? So that's quite an interesting way when you're looking at managing a SEND team, because it can be a really tough job, making sure you focus on the staff experience as well as their supporting young people, and the benefit to the organisation can give you a really a rounded way to act as a manager. So just thinking about valuing staff and developing staff and recognising the contribution that they make, and also for each member of staff being able to articulate the impact that they are having in the organisation they're working in. It sounds like a really small detail, but for us, this is the role of that SEN manager, of that specialist practitioner, is saying, well, no, you're really important to the student's journey for this reason, and that's why you're here, and this is the difference your role makes. And then when they can tell other people about the difference their role makes, the conversations and the culture is so positive and inspiring around the organisation, that it is a really great thing. It's something that we've certainly worked hard on since about 2005 in terms of understanding that staff experience and how that contributes to culture and how that shapes an organisation that's continuously learning. So I think that is a really key thing to recognise when we start thinking about what a SEN manager role looks like, what's the specialist practitioner element, and that being able to work with staff and for them to understand the difference that they're making is key. I then looked briefly, referring back to the code of practice. So this is in both the FE guidance and the main code of practice. There's a massive emphasis. You even get to its own chapter, preparing for adulthood. And this is significant for us as a sector. The most important thing for me in terms of preparing for adulthood is recognising the breadth of outcomes. So the young people that you all work with, the young people that we work with at STAR, there is a massive range of SEND learners, and there is a massive range of outcomes. So it's, I think when preparing for adulthood first came about all those many moons ago, a lot of the focus was on employment and independent living. But I think now, certainly, you know, in light of recent times as well, mental well-being, relationships, community, social connectedness, that is so important for our young people, and that is such a significant thing that a SEN manager needs to understand, know about, because it's something that for our most complex young people, we have to broker packages of support for when they leave college, and we have to make sure that these social connections and relationships are the key thing that we're looking at as they progress into adult life, or in achieving some of the other things, say independent living, we're actually sacrificing some of the very human elements that young people need. So I really hope you can read these slides when you get them. I've looked at preparing for adulthood in 4 key areas. So one is the impact of support for individual students. And I've posed these as questions that you could ask, a manager could ask themselves when they're thinking about their provision, what they're managing, the area they're managing. So you know, does the student's main learning goal reflect their individual transition aspiration? So are you actually working in line with the education, health and care plan, what the student wants to do, the progression opportunities available? Are you working towards that end goal? And if the activity doesn't contribute to that end goal, that's okay, but you have to understand why. Is it something that the young person finds psychologically rewarding and needs that to maintain well-being, to engage in the rest of their programme? So I think it's just to challenge yourself and think about why you've got individual elements of a programme, and are they working towards that that future, that destination that the young person is working towards. Curriculum as well, we've looked at just a few bullet points, and this isn't an exhaustive list, these are just examples to start you thinking. So flexible pathways linked to individualized outcomes, I'm sure everybody does that. You know, your baseline period, establishing those multidisciplinary goals, you know, that's really key to get that good baseline period. So these are just ways that you can check and ask yourself those questions. again, we then looked at, in that preparing for adulthood, it's that effective delivery of services that support students and the leadership, management and governance. So again, it's questions that you can think about in terms of making a judgment and assessment around managing provision. So whole organisational approach. This refers back to quite a few people that we've met with, spoken with, done training programs for, spent time with since 2018. Often SEND can be a bolt-on or just to one side, or there's separate provision for high needs learners than there is for SEND support learners. So it's how to really move to that whole organisational approach to student support, and how is that embedded from leadership down and from the sort of classroom up. So how does that work? And again, that relies on understanding leadership, management and governance, and that culture of continuous improvement and that inclusive organisation as well. So that's something that we spent quite a lot of time on in the SEND Managers programme. And it's, for us, it's answering those types of questions and those building blocks when we start thinking about what would that SEND manager's role look like across an organisation, and what would be the responsibilities that it has to deliver as well, because there are, in terms of pulling together a range of partners and people, it is such a pivotal role. Just to conclude, from me, I think I just spent a bit of time thinking about what the case for change would be. So why, as an organisation, would you want to do something differently? Why would you want to commit to investing within that role? And I think it's a big change that all colleges are going through as your learners become more and more complex. The breadth of outcomes you're trying to achieve for learners is broader, it's more multidisciplinary, you're working with more external partners, you have responsibility for transition and the success of those outcomes. So I think it was thinking about that, and the organisation now has an aspiration to meet all of these needs, and they want them to be able to do that, but also as well for staff as well. So staff understanding, back to them understanding the difference that they make and being able to talk about that, because surely that increases inclusion for all. If you've got positive staff who are talking about their jobs, who are going everywhere, every impact, every interaction that they have will be a positive thing and potentially make a difference for a learner, whether it's finding a job placement, getting them a job, finding them somewhere to live, or securing that next step on for them. I'm going to stop sharing now and see if we take any questions and then move on to Barney. There we go, I should be back. Hello? Any questions, or are you ready for Barney? Barney, looks like you're on. Thank you.
I'm ready. Okay.
Yeah, sorry, I couldn't get my microphone to turn on then, but yeah, I think that there isn't any questions that's come through, Davina, directly to you. So let's move on to Barney.
Thanks, Sam.
Okay, Davina, thank you very much indeed. Davina, can you just let me know that you can hear me?
I can hear you and see your slides, so it's all good.
That's wonderful. Thank you very much. So I am going to look at the context in which a specialist role might be developed. And I'm going to go fairly quickly through just a small number of slides to look at why there is so much structure and so much recognition for specialist roles in schools, but not in further education. And I'm going to start here with some research that was done 2 years ago, which included a survey in schools asking about the drivers to prioritize SEND issues. And the two that came out as the strongest drivers are featured in this slide. First of all, meeting the identified needs of children on the SEN register, and 36% of people who responded to the survey felt that that was the strongest driver to prioritise SEND in professional development activities within their school. The other and equally prominent driver appears to be the statement by respondents that SEND CPD is part of a school development plan that needs to be actioned and delivered. Well, what that really might be showing us is that sometimes SEND is prioritized in CPD because it's regarded as essential to meet children's needs. And other times it might be prioritized because it's just on the to-do list, which is a bit depressing if that's really what's behind it. So taking that forward and thinking about the difference between the environment of FE and the environment of SEND in schools, I looked back to a policy which was started at the very end of the Labour government in 2009, Department of Health policy called Valuing Employment Now. And it's important to understand that Valuing Employment Now was a policy relating to people with learning disabilities of all ages, working age that is, including young people. But I've highlighted something because it has significance for all of us working in SEND. And the part that I've quoted there was from the media briefing for the policy, where they claimed that they were setting out an ambitious goal to increase radically the number of people with learning disabilities in employment by 2025. Bearing in mind this was 2009, and their target date is now just 4 years away. The briefing went on to say the government wants as many as possible of these jobs to be at least 16 hours per week. And the part I've emphasised in the briefing is the next bit. We aspire to close the gap between the employment rate of, close the gap, hold on, close the gap between the employment rate of people with learning disabilities, yes, this is what we want, and that of the disabled population as a whole. Hold on. So the target of employment for people with learning disabilities is only to reach the same rate of employment as other disabled people, not as the population in general. That's quite depressing. I suspect it would probably be very controversial if it was released now. Let's compare that with a piece of research done 2 years ago. The reference for it is at the bottom of the slide. It's an excellent paper called Ensuring an Independent Future for Young People with Special Educational Needs and Disabilities, a critical examination of the impact of education, health and care plans in England. And this is just one observation from it. Despite the lengthening of participation in education, policymakers typically construct the desired and ultimate objective of these transitions as paid work and independent living. For some young people, paid employment may not be a viable opportunity. The outcomes for young people with SEND may be more varied and complex, and the corresponding decisions which need to be made may require more time, specialist knowledge, and support. So the part which I've highlighted at the end of that quote is really, I think, a good basis on which to consider and welcome the development of a specialist role in further education, understanding that young people with SEND may not be aiming at paid employment, whether it's 16 hours a week or more. They may be aiming for something different. And if they are aiming for employment, and if they are aiming to enjoy the same aspirations as people without disabilities, then they do need and deserve specialists in a further education setting who have those three assets: more time, specialist knowledge, and support. So here's the big question. Why is special needs practice less regulated in further education? Why are we only now considering a specialist role recognised and accredited in further education, when we've had special needs coordinators in schools seemingly forever? I've listed here 13 reasons off the top of my head why, from my experience, SEND practice in further education is less regulated than it is in schools. And if you wish to take exception or to express a different point of view about any of these, I'd be delighted to hear from you through Sam and Caroline and everyone who's organising this event, or you can just throw something at your screen. But I think I'm on solid ground in saying that these are 13 ways in which SEND practice is less regulated. That doesn't mean it doesn't happen correctly, but the regulation is not there in the same way that it is for schools. First of all, then, further education is more market-driven, responding to employment and technology trends. That's not controversial. You know, you only have to look at the latest white paper on further education to see that. Secondly, more stakeholders and partnerships than schools. Colleges are more dynamic. They have external-facing priorities. And thirdly, as a result of that, SEND has a lower profile in colleges' strategic thinking because there is so much else going on for colleges in their relationship with their locality, with the communities that they serve. The fourth point there's less accountability for SEND through governance and inspection. That means there's less incentive for self-evaluation and professional development. The fifth point, in schools, SEND and inclusion is responsibility recognised as a stepping stone to leadership. I know that. I worked in schools for most of my career. In further education, we only have a named person for SEND processes. We don't have an official SENCo. And that means that there is less recognition and SEND is less obviously quoted as a stepping stone to becoming, for example, an assistant head teacher in a school. The sixth point, unlike further education, unlike schools, further education providers are not funded by their starts. In other words, the children counted on the census every year who've joined the school with special needs. Further education providers are funded by the number of completions, and that represents a bigger risk to the college, and therefore every SEND admission is a risk. The seventh point, providers can terminate enrolments within 42 days. In other words, you can drop a student without it going through an exclusion process. That has real implications for SEND. The eighth point, employees do not require minimum qualification to take on a SEND coordination role, whereas school SENCos must hold qualified teacher status. The SENCo role in schools is really unusual in the education landscape by virtue of the fact that you must have QTS and you must also, my ninth point, you must have the National SENCo Award to be a SENCo in school, whereas in college that's not a requirement. Point number 10, there is no statutory duty to report on SEND provision. If you were a SENCo in a school, you would have to update on your website the SEND information. There are 14 points that you have to discuss in your report, and it has to be accessible to everyone on the school's website. The 11th point there, and this may come as a surprise to you, and I'd really love to hear your comments by email on this. There is no statutory responsibility for colleges to conduct annual reviews. If you check the regulations, it's in Regulation 20. Schools are delegated the duty to conduct annual reviews by their local authority. Colleges must only conduct the annual review process if they have agreed to accept that responsibility from their local authority. And that is incredibly complicated because many colleges are serving more than one local authority. So different arrangements, in theory, could apply. But if you are weighed down by the responsibility of conducting the annual review process, it might be interesting to explore how far that has been agreed with local authorities around you. 12th point, there is less use of therapies, sadly, but it's true, there is less use of therapies such as speech and language, occupational therapy and physiotherapy, and I'm talking obviously about therapies that work mainly in a pediatric model. And so that reduces the availability of specialist guidance to practitioners in further education. And the last point there, and this is crucial, I think, there is an expectation at 16 plus that learners will self-advocate. In other words, they will make their choices and decisions. Whereas in school, parents generally are making all the decisions, and parents act, whether they're aware of it or not, they act as involuntary supervisors of the support. And without them fulfilling that role, there is a risk of the inobservance of statutory rights, because how many 16 and 17-year-olds know what their rights are in relation to the content of their EHCP, or in relation to the fact that they might need an EHCP and they don't have one? So here is a grid which I use when I'm helping providers with self-evaluation, and you'll see down the left-hand side that it is structured on the three planks, if you like, of Ofsted's approach: intent, implementation, and impact. And of course, these are also the focus of an SAR. If you are involved in your college's SAR, you will know that the three I's, intent, implementation, and impact, are a part of that focus. And reading across the top of the grid are 6 themes about provision, about the learner's needs, carers' needs, college's needs, local needs. And these are really qualitative themes. And then for each of the 3 I's, there are those 6 questions drilling down into what happens in the setting. This is really a very condensed version of the longer audits or self-evaluations that are popular now. But these 18 questions, I find, are very effective in taking the lid off the provision and the practices that go on in one setting. Well, how useful is it to conduct a self-evaluation like that? Well, it's useful in several ways. First of all, I've mentioned SAR, but it's also extremely useful in identifying your professional development needs and the long-term direction of professional development. And therefore, in the context that we're talking about today, it's useful to think of those thematic, qualitative questions as part of the context in which one might develop a specialist role in further education. That kind of self-evaluation evidence is also essential for many funding applications, including when colleges are making approaches to their local authority to expand provision, and including when colleges are working with employers and social enterprises. And finally, the local offer is another part of the outcome, if you like, the value of self-evaluation. So my final slide then, here I've tried to set out 8 types of knowledge or skill which might help us to define SEND occupational standards in an FE environment. And some of these have already been explored very, very carefully by Sam and Davina. Firstly, then, the statutory and regulatory context for SEN and disability equality. And secondly, the principles and practice of leadership and culture change, which Sam and Davina spoke about. Thirdly, how SEN and disabilities affect learners' access to education and training. There's been a lot of research about that in recent years, particularly on outcomes for learners with SEND in FE, and particularly for learners who are in alternative settings at 16 plus. Lots of new research has come out, really worth digging into. The fourth point there, strategies for improving outcomes for learners with SEN and or disabilities. Strategies are quite widely researched now in systematic reviews for the school sector. We're still desperately lacking in evidence about strategies that work in FE. The fifth point, working strategically with senior colleagues and stakeholders is a whole different set of skills. The sixth point, leading, developing and challenging practice for learners with SEN. Well, I'm sure you're experienced at doing that. It's part of what we do every day. But knowing what outcomes you want from leading and developing and challenging your colleagues, that is the acid test. The last two, I've spoken about reviewing and evaluating provision and working with external agencies. These, I think, give a broad picture of the scope, if you like, that we might assume for occupational standards in a specialist role. I hope there's something there that supports your own thinking and might lead you into further research. I'd welcome any questions. If you can email them to the organisers of the event, they'll forward them to me and I'm happy to reply individually to those. And with that, I'm going to hand back to Sam if I can do that.
Thank you, Barney, and to Davina. That was really interesting, and that gave, I think that Barney, your slide where you had the 13 points about how actually colleges aren't regulated like the schools, I think that just brought it all home to the differences and why sometimes we feel as FE providers that maybe we may be the poor relation at times. And also don't have those statutory requirements in place and that governance like there is in the schools around SEND. So thank you, everybody. And I can see that lots of people are interested in finding out more about the program, the management program, Davina, that I know that you guys have been running previously. And I know that there's lots of people asking there. So I think that if you do want to, I know that we've got staff at Weston College who are really interested. So Davina, will you get back to us all? So to find out whether, because I think it is about the training, and I think that there's some useful toolkits this afternoon that Barney and Davina have showed that when you're writing the strategic plans or you're talking to your senior managers, is being able to show some of those slides actually are really useful. So thank you. I know we've provided lots of information today, and and I hope that the kind of the end of our second phase of the SEN Centre of Excellence and how we go into the third the third phase after the Easter break will really encapsulate what we've been talking about over the whole year. Is about looking after our staff and our students, but also making sure that there's that professionalism within SEND and that it's really recognised across the sector. I can see people have got to jump off. And Davina, there is a question around how long is the manager's training?
So it's usually between 2 and 4 days. Barney and I do a 2-day section. We've done it in a variety of ways. People have come to staff for 2 days. We've been into other organisations for 2 days. And it depends, if you're doing a whole big team, it's quite effective if we do a day, then leave a period of time and then go back and do another day. It just depends what your organisational need is. And it's something which we can change depending on how we want to do it, and whether we're working with just one organisation or people from a range of organisations. But it is quite a flexible thing. I think we're just waiting to have confirmation from ETF about funding. The intent is there, I think, to carry on delivering the programme. So it'll just be a case of when that's confirmed, organising how it works best for everyone. And that will probably be a series of individual conversations, and then we'll come up with a way that it may work in groups, or it may be us coming out to individual organisations.
I think the next question, just leading on from that, and you touched on it around ETF funding it, but the next question was, how much is it going to cost the college for the staff to attend? So
I will check that and come back.
I think that if we're hearing from the sector that there's a real need for this, and it may be that we were able to put something within the SEND Centre for Excellence in our communities of practice around that, and to see whether we can have that as part of this centre. So that might then cause it to be subsidised by this, and we could bring some groups together. And I know that there's been some really exciting focus groups about maths and English, and we've done one on developmental trauma, we've done one on autism, but I think that could be something that we have a focus group around managers where we're developing these skills, and they go through that training over a longer period. So if that's what that's what we're hearing back from you all that you want, that might be something we can be slightly creative with our funding there, if it doesn't come directly through ETF, because I think it's just so important to have that level of training, whether it's at practitioner level or manager level. You need and aspiring managers, and we need to be succession planning for the futures, don't we, to protect our colleges and growing our own.
Yeah, and I think for us, tying it back into the Centre of Excellence, it just makes sense, doesn't it, to combine what we're doing with, you know, how the centres of excellence are operating, because then we're not duplicating anything. So that, you know, we'll come up with a plan somehow and let everybody know how it works.
Great. And I think that with all of these SEND Centre for Excellence activities, and I'm hoping that you can now see my slide, you know, there is an opportunity for us to be feeding back to the Department for Education through ETF, and they have created this Survey Monkey, and, you know, if you were, you know, to secure this kind of support for the sector for the future, we need DFE to want to continue invest and to see the impact that it's having within our organisation. So as you can see there, I've shared the link, and I know everybody's exhausted. I know it's late in the day, but if anybody has 10 minutes, it won't take that long. It won't probably take longer than 10 minutes, that could just complete the survey for, you know, so we can feed back, then that would be brilliant. We'll capture a list of the questions and the people that were saying, yes, I'm interested in becoming that trailblazer group, to look at that occupational standard, and also to look at that job coaching role that Sarah from Derby College has suggested that's really needed across the sector. And also the capturing the people that are thinking that the Essential Managers course is so important. We've got that, but if there's anything extra, like I said at the beginning, then please feel free to bombard us with your emails. And as you can see there, there's our email address. But I suppose that unless we've got any particular questions or pertinent points that anybody wants to make, then we know it's 5 o'clock, and you've listened very patiently for an hour, and hopefully the sun is shining in your areas, and you've got a chance to get out and have some fresh air before the end of the day. Hopefully your colleges are kicking you out, or those of you that are still working from home, you know, you can shut down the computer and have some fresh air. Caroline has kindly shared the link in the chat around that Survey Monkey. So I can see that there's no other questions coming through. We really appreciated all your support over the last 2 years with the Centre for Excellence, and we're just looking forward to building it even more and making sure that we've got those communities that in each of our colleges that are supporting each other and sharing best practice. So thank you to Davina and Pabani for joining us this afternoon and bringing that information to the table to get those to us thinking about what we need within our organisation. So we're going to we're still here if anybody wants to ask us any questions, but please feel free to log off and enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sam. That was fab.
Oh.